Thank you so much for tuning in to this Masterclass Series webinar. My name is Florence Hudson, and I'm Executive Director of the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub at Columbia University. And we're delighted to bring to you today a very special speaker. This is part of the Masterclass Series hosted by the National Student Data Corps, which was created in 2020 and has grown to over 5,400 students, educators, and professionals around the planet interested in enabling the learning and teaching of open online free data science education materials. So this is our February 2024 Masterclass series, and this is episode number 5. And this is Open Source Framework for Interactive Massive Scale Graph Analytics, which is extremely cool. So our guest speaker today is David Bader. Dr. Bader is a distinguished professor and director at the Institute for Data Science at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, and he is a key leader of the Northeast Big Data Hub leadership team and actually chaired our Seed Fund Steering Committee. And he's done incredible work for his university, across the ecosystem for the Northeast Big Data Hub, and he's a real thought leader and do leader, as I like to say, related to knowledge graphs and knowledge networks and education. Also with us, but hiding, is Emily Rothenberg, who is the National Student Data Corps NSDC Program Manager, and she organizes all of these masterclass series. So I really want to thank her for doing that. And so now what I'd like to do is allow David to share his slides and take us through his really cool content. And then we're going to have a little Q&A at the end, and we'll learn from each other and be able to teach you.
So thank you for asking me to speak here to the masterclass. I'm really excited to talk about the innovations that we are creating to democratize very large-scale data science frameworks for analyzing graphs and graph analytics. We call our project Arachne, and I'm just delighted to tell you about the innovations that we have. In our project, we're often working with analysts who receive tens of terabytes of data, and the enterprise class tools available to them often don't cut it for analyzing these types of data sets. Either the data is too large or it takes too much time to run through the types of analytics that they're seeking. So in this project, we're creating tools that really combine productivity. We're using Python, the lingua franca of data scientists, along with some high-performance computing tools that we help develop to really make the ability for anyone around the world, anyone on this planet, to have HPC capabilities to analyze massive data sets. So let me tell you a little bit more. When I think about data science in general, often I draw these two axes, and I call this the data quad because it splits the space into 4 regions. The x-axis are objects in the data, from known objects on the left to unknown objects on the right. And the y-axis are patterns in the data, from known patterns on the bottom to unknown patterns on the top. So the space gets divided into 4 regions, and there are regions where we know how to solve problems in data science quite well. For instance, the lower left-hand region, where we have known objects and known patterns. This area has been solved since the 1980s using relational databases, where we have, for instance, as an example, customers who shop at a store, and we know records about the customer. We know for the store all the items being sold and their SKUs and their prices. And then when a customer checks out, their shopping cart associates their ID with the items in that cart, and we can answer all sorts of queries in that space. Or on the 2 off diagonals, on the upper left, we have known objects and unknown patterns, or in the lower right, we have known patterns and unknown objects. And we have tools to solve these types of problems as well. But what is really exciting and really fascinating to me is this upper right-hand quadrant of unknown unknowns, sometimes called the 4th quadrant. And this is where the interesting data sits. Often we find that there could be surprises lurking in this data. So for instance, when COVID-19 hit the world by surprise, that was an example of one of the big surprises that may lurk in data, where we haven't seen an event occur previously, but finding it is of huge importance. Or for instance, in cybersecurity, we often hear of zero-day exploits where there is an intrusion or malicious software that goes on an attack using a mechanism that nobody's ever witnessed before. And so it's very important to understand data sets and what's lurking in this sort of murky unknown unknowns. So these data sets come from multiple domains. They often are very, very large. And we look for tools to try to understand these types of data sets. Now, when I see data, I see objects in the data, I see relationships between those items, and I think of it as a graph where the vertices represent the objects and edges represent the connections or relationships between those objects. And then we can start asking graph analytics about those data sets. Fortunately, we've been funded by the National Science Foundation for several years now to develop an open source framework that democratizes the ability to do data science at scale. And we've extended this framework to include graph analytics as well. We marry the combination of productivity and performance. By productivity, as I mentioned earlier, data science typically use Python and Jupyter notebooks to interact with data sets. They use known interfaces like pandas, NumPy, maybe NetworkX for graphs. And this is a very comfortable way to design data science workflows. We wanted to leverage that in the system that we're building. And also we wanted to bring to the table high performance computing. And we're doing so by using a very special productivity and performance programming language called Chapel that HPE has developed over many, many years. And this combination has allowed us to build a system, the base of which we call Arcuda, the Greek word for bear, and then Arachne, the Greek word for spider, are the modules of Arcuda focused on graph analytics. So in this chart, we have a user on the left interacting as they would with their Python code or in a Jupyter notebook. And this is how they interact with their data sets. What we built out is on the right-hand side of the slide in a Chapel server that could run on their laptop, it could run on a cluster, could even run on a large supercomputer. And this is where the large data and metadata sit. And what we have been building out are new modules that look like NumPy and Pandas and NetworkX, but imagine them on steroids, able to operate in seconds or minutes on data sets that could be tens of terabytes in size. So anywhere around the world, any person now gets supercomputer capabilities all from their desktop. And this is all open source. On GitHub, you can find Arcuda and Arachne, and even the Chapel compiler from HPE is also open source on GitHub. So it's a completely open source stack. And I encourage anyone watching to go to GitHub, try it out, kick the tires, and see if it works for them. And even if you're so inclined, contribute to this great open source project. Now, let me give you a couple examples of some analytics. There's a very famous network science problem called Zachary's Karate Club. Back in the early 1970s, for a couple years, Zachary was a person, a sociologist, who was studying a karate club with 34 individuals, and he noted 78 relationships between those individuals, friendships, if you will. And over the course of watching this group, they split in half. And using graph analytics, he was able to deduce algorithms that could tell us whether or not a member of the club would have gone in one of the two directions as the club fractured in its operation. Now, what we do is we load in these types of data sets, and here's an example on the lower left where we have 78 rows, each representing one of the relationships between two integers, source and destination, representing two of the people. What we do is use Arcuda to turn that input into a graph data structure that we call a double index data structure in the center. And then we can run our graph analytics and get results, for instance, understanding the communities that each individual sat in. Here on the right-hand side, we see a label as output 0 or 1. 0 meant they went with the first leader, 1 meant they went with the second leader. And it's this way of operating that allows us to implement and get high performance on many, many types of graph analytics at scale. For instance, we've been working with Harvard University, and I give them credit for this slide, and they are interested in understanding how brains work, and this is called the Connectome Project. We're working with Hans-Peter Pfister and Jeff Lichtman for trying to take a brain where every neuron is identified and all the synapses or connections in those brains also are noted, turn that into a very large graph, and then work with neuroscientists to try to find patterns of interest in those graphs. We're using Arcuda and Arachne to work on some of the largest biological data sets on the planet today, and we're really quite excited by this project. Or for instance, we work in cybersecurity. Here's an example of a NetFlow data pipeline. In this table, every line here, every row is representative of a packet in that network, where we have a source IP and port for the packet, a destination address and port for the packet. And we also have some attributes such as the size of the packet and the type of protocol of that packet. We want to ingest a lot of cybersecurity NetFlow data, build a graph doing group bys on the source or destination addresses, and then send that graph off to Arachne, where cybersecurity analysts can look at that information and try to understand, are there attacks in progress, and even give attribution to those attacks. So our framework is very general purpose. It can be used for many types of problems coming from science, from engineering, from finance, and more. Here's an example, for instance, of some code that an analyst may write. And this uses both Arcuda and Arachne. It's an eye chart, I know, to look at this on the screen, so I won't go through all of it. But essentially, we read in a graph from a data file. So we read in rows from CSV, from Parquet, from HDF5. We build our graph. And then at the very bottom of the slide, there are a couple lines that run some graph analytics like breadth first search, connected components, finding triangles in the graph, and other types of structures within that graph. And that can be used again for further analysis. So in just a couple lines of Python, we have interactive massive scale graph analytics that anyone could write. Now, the success of this project is really due to my students in my lab. So I really want to recognize the undergraduate students and master's students, even high school students in the region who've contributed to this work. In fact, Anya is one of our high school students, now a student at Columbia University. Pranam is at Johns Hopkins. And then all of our PhD students in my lab that have done some great work on Arcuda and Arachne, and also my research faculty, Zihui Du. And finally, I want to recognize Mike Merrill. Mike worked for the Department of Defense and was one of the visionaries we worked with on the vision to build Arcuda. I promised Mike that I would always recognize him when I talk about this work. So once again, thank you for inviting me to this masterclass. And I really hope everyone watching this, all of the students out there, know that they can change the world by doing open source software development and really tackle some of the most grand challenge problems facing our population around the planet using tools like those that I described here. So thank you again, Florence and Emily, for inviting me to speak.
Thank you, David. That was excellent. And I always learn so much when you present, whether I learn about new open source materials and resources, or how you're applying, your great work. On that note, I was so excited when you were talking about how this can apply to so many different industries and use cases. So it sounds like you're already working with the biology or biotechnology crowd. I would guess you might be working with some others, I don't know, in DoD or finance, but you can decide what you can say. But it might be interesting for some of the people listening who are familiar with different industries or use cases who are thinking about where can I use data science? Maybe you could give a few more examples of where you think this could be applied more deeply. Maybe there's even somebody in the audience watching this on YouTube who would love to partner with you in another area. So maybe you could give us a little feel for where else you think this could be applied.
Lawrence, that's a great question. And when I look at sectors of the economy, everywhere I see applications that can use data science, whether it's transportation, security, fintech, manufacturing, retail, tech companies, food production, gaming and entertainment, fashion, you name it, there is the need for large scale data science. So, for instance, we sit here in the New York, New Jersey region, and we're one of the largest smart ports in the world in Jersey City, New Jersey. If you think about transportation and shipping, as we have supply chains, global supply chains, where products move multimodal from shipping containers on the seas into ports and through trucks and trains across the land, and even organizing warehouses as products move around. That is a huge data science and graph analytics problem to do that planning, to do that logistics and movement and that optimization. So that's really something unique to this region and anywhere around the world that these supply chains reach. There's also problems in healthcare. That's a big use for data science as we look at electronic health records of patients, and we're able to understand families and understand connections, understand diseases more unique to individuals, and be able to pull together holistically entire patient records, we'll be able to get to the ideal of having personalized medicine and personalized treatment, not in general where we take medicines that may be effective 60% of the time, they may have side effects 20% of the time. Wouldn't it be great if we had a medicine that we knew would be 99% effective, even as we're treating some horrible diseases out there where we know how to treat it much better? Also, as we look at pandemics, we just went through COVID-19, and it wasn't the first pandemic, it won't be the last pandemic, where we want to understand how diseases spread among populations, how do we protect individuals, how do we manage, for instance, shutting down particular sectors of the economy and bring them back up, and to do that in a very careful and planned manner. These are areas also that use data science and graph analytics. So there's many, many cases everywhere that we look where we have people and industries and government, we see places that these graph analytics and data science methods work well.
Wow, that's so mind expanding. I love when you do that. One of the things I'd like to mention is that related to healthcare, as you know, we run this COVID Information Commons for the US government, and we actually have over 12,000 NSF and NIH funded awards in there now and PIs that we're working with. And actually, we're working on writing a book with Springer Nature on the learnings, for future pandemics, what their research was, what their goal was, what the outcomes were, and what their recommendations are related to future pandemics. So, that's one area where I'm wondering if this could be an interesting project, to look at some of those results and the research. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I was fortunate to be invited by the National Cancer Institute to speak at a conference of Virtual Human Global Summit. How cool is that? A couple of months ago. And a bunch of NIH and healthcare and NCI and Department of Energy, because they have a lot of the big horsepower, as you know, for high performance computing, were there. And they've invited me. I'm really honored to be part of the organizing committee for Virtual Human Global Alliance. And what we were talking about while we were there is one of the areas I focus on under cybersecurity, as you were talking about, is this standard I'm developing with IEEE and Underwriters Laboratory called TIPS, Trust, Identity, Privacy, Protection, Safety, and Security. We were talking about, well, all this stuff is virtual. There are a whole lot of attack surfaces, the devices, the humans, the data, all these different things. And you're just making me think about that might be like a really interesting use case as we develop this virtual human global alliance. And, you think of things like the Cancer Genome Atlas or other data sets, there are a whole bunch of data sets that they have. I'm just thinking this could be a really exciting application of the work that you do. Does that make any sense?
It does. I've been interested in massive scale data and graph analytics. And for instance, imagine you could build full socio-economic political models of entire regions or nations, and then understand how laws and policies will affect the population. That would be great if we could run those what if scenarios, all the way down to something that I'm really jazzed about. We often are interacting with devices. We personally are generating so much personal data. And right now, that data just sits in maybe a backup file that we download from our healthcare provider or from our email, and it's not having much use. What if we could take all of that data that we generate ourselves and build digital mirrors or digital clones of our digital selves and be able to use those digital instances, that digital mirror, to help us better navigate the world? So I'm really excited that we're getting to places where we're so data rich and we finally have tools, whether it's machine learning or knowledge graphs or other types of analytics, to be able to analyze these types of data to make our lives and to make the planet a safer and healthier place.
Wow, that's an exciting idea. And you know what? We actually just kicked off for our COVID information commons. We have a student working group, and we actually just kicked off the spring of 2024 project, which is analyzing pandemic responses. And they're using an Oxford data set and stuff. So, boy, there are cool things we can talk about. And those of you out there might be thinking the same thing. So, David is at NJIT, the New Jersey Institute of Technology. You can find him on the leadership page of the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub as well. And I really want to thank you for this really insightful and inspiring talk in our masterclass series. So, on that note, I'll thank everybody, especially thank David, thank Emily for putting this all together, and thank you all for listening in. And we hope that you learned a lot and you can apply this in the future. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thanks so much.